Rewritten! The pain was just as he remembered it. It felt like he had been wrenched inside out, as if he had yanked on his guts until his skin was on the inside and his organs were on the outside. The fleshy cord caught only for a moment before snapping, flopping back onto his bare skin and letting go of what he'd been after. The disconnection was jarring, like roughly pulling a plug on a TV, the signal going out. The hollering voice zapped out of his mind in an abrupt instant, weakness and empty loneliness setting in to take its place. There was a spray of hot, dark blood. It was gushing from him. He was screaming, struggling to breathe, every nerve in his body being struck by lightning bolts of suffering, forcing him to curl over, contorting in the crippling agony. It was excruciating and indescribable. He was glad as the numbness began to crawl through him, the adrenaline rushing to his aid, allowing vague thoughts and senses to trickle through his brain once more. He did it. She was out. He gaped down at his blood-soaked hands, which were shaking so badly that he nearly dropped the precious item held there. It was a rosy, pointed, glittering jewel, the spike end soaked in crimson, a thick, trailing vein of flesh broken off of it. His gem. Pink diamond. Outside of him. Finally. And despite the intense, erupting, torturous pain in his gut, Stephen had never felt more relieved to have his gem's sickly voice removed from his head. He could feel the crooked smile splinter across his face like a crack in a mirror, followed by a wheezing chuckle that twisted up into a breathless giggle. Yes, she's gone. His head snapped up, his grin crackling with a twitched end, to see if his family was proud of what he did. She's gone, he told them eagerly. They were still trapped outside the pink dome, safe from him. But to his confusion, they looked anything but proud. In fact, their reactions were ranging from shrieking panic to mortified silence. This was the first time they'd witnessed this. What was wrong? He fixed it. He fixed all of it. He fixed the one biggest, most destructive problem. Pink diamond. He didn't need his gem. He had a pair of every organ, functional due to Connie's body. He had enough human in him to survive, right? Everything would be fine. Everything would be fine. However, just as everything began to be fine, it was ruined again, by none other than Pink. The gem cupped in his clawed hands began to shine and rock back and forth like a hatching egg. It wanted to come out in form just like before. Disgust and loathing rose in him like a stinging bile, the urge to make it get as far away as possible from him searing like a chain reaction up his spine. Stephen chucked the rosy, blood-slick jewel away from him, letting it clatter to a rolling stop in the wet sand, on the other end of the protective dome. His gem continued to shift and glow, lifting off of the salty mud and hovering in the air. Light began to pour from its surface, wrapping itself in a solidifying mass, reforming. This time, it didn't flicker from its mother's forms to his own. It already knew who it was. So when the light blazed in its finality, revealing what figure it wanted, it was a perfect copy of Stephen. Actually, it was even better than Stephen. He wasn't half corrupted, half dead, and partially fused with the corpse of a human. He actually looked more normal than the real Stephen did, which made him question what real even meant in this context. His gem took his taller teenage form, jacket and all, with curly hair like little rose blossoms, a rounded face, and large, dark eyes. The only difference was that he was made of a pink, shimmering substance, not unlike what Stephen looked like during his pink outbursts. There was not a trace of corruption left on his gem, not even the speckled dots that he'd seen before on the crystal surface. Stephen's pink reflection landed lightly on the sand, standing there stiffly. The last time they'd met face-to-face had been in White Diamond's throne room. But then, it was because they were forced apart. Now, they were meeting because of their own internal conflict. His gem's posture radiated a powerful stillness. His expression was still mostly empty, almost shocked, blinking several times like he was adjusting to the newly rising sun behind them. He looked down at himself, lifting his shirt to examine his gem. It was still stained with crimson blood. Stephen could only guess that he seemed bothered by that. Then, looking up again, his gem locked into Stephen's gaze, his dilated pupil expanding like a cat's. His pupil wasn't even diamond-shaped. It was the normal human circle. Disbelief rippled through his gem's features, but he didn't seem to be able to understand or summon up any of his own emotions. Stephen was both himself and his gem. He could feel his gem's confusion and betrayal, see his own bloody body through his eyes. But this time, he was more himself. His human half was rejecting his gem's connection, trying to force it out until it was difficult to see what his gem was seeing. Stephen couldn't focus on him for much longer. The pain flowing through him was building in strength, wiping out almost all rational thought, and the more that he pushed his gem half away, the worse it got. He was terribly lightheaded. Everything was too bright, too blurry. It felt like the bits of his mind were drifting out of reach from one another, not able to piece together a moment of clarity, the void in between them throbbing and squirming with agony that forced them even further apart. He couldn't breathe. The small Connie arms were involuntarily trying to press his jacket sleeves into the wound, but the torn fabric wasn't doing much to stem the flow of blood. He doubled over with a groaning gasp of a struggle, unable to get enough air into his lungs, the torn tendons in the skin on his belly stretched with unbearable throbbing. He gagged a bubbling cough, tasting a vile iron tang, feeling the warmth dribble down his chin. His gem's attention was caught immediately by that, alert like a mother bear around her hurt cub. Concern showed through his eyes as he began to approach Stephen, his arms outstretched. His gem ignored the hollers of his family outside, telling him in a calm and even tone, "Do not worry, Stephen. I am coming. Please do not throw me out again." Resentment lashed through him as he watched his gem getting closer, kneeling down and reaching his hands around him. He was in too much pain to do anything but accept it at first, an instinctual part of him aching for the gem's energy, his brain telling him that he needed him. But as he was pulled up towards him into the tight embrace, feeling the warmth of his gem shining to fill the gaping hole it left, the anger rose up sharply to give him strength. Stephen roughly shoved his gem half away from him. He collapsed heavily with a yelp without its support, the gem nudged back lightly despite the force that he tried to put into the push. His family gasped and called his name outside the dome, but he barely heard them. He was still curled over, biting back the horrible exhaustion that was clamping over his chest, his brain trying to kick its way out of his skull. His gem blinked at him, still on his knees next to him. He didn't seem to understand. He reached for Stephen again, telling him in a robotic voice, "I am attempting fusion. Please do not resist." The warmth of his gem's palms was so welcoming, so pleasant, Stephen almost forgot why he didn't want it. But he managed to pull himself together, slapping away the fluorescent pink hands a second time. His gem half still didn't seem to be getting it, as if his struggles were minor inconveniences. He stopped to explain like he thought Stephen was stupid. "I am your gem. You are my body. We are apart. We need to fuse to be whole again." "No! Get away from me!" Stephen shouted harshly, his throat hoarse and gurgled with blood. The words had stopped his gem in his tracks. Even though he couldn't express much, his gem was still thinking. He could see him slowly processing what Stephen just did to them, as well as what he had said, like a computer, trying to comprehend why he was without his other half, and why said other half was resisting his help. Stephen could tell that he felt utterly betrayed, but didn't have the full comprehension of that emotion. And then, with a hollow tone, his gem broke the stunned quiet with a single, level-toned word. "Why?" It felt like he had been slapped in the face. Stephen was seething with smoldering coals as eyes, quaking with his own burning emotions, the magma rising inside of him, building pressure like a volcano ready to blow. To think that his gem still didn't get it, still didn't understand why he despised it, still didn't know why he wanted it to go, why he was so... Because... Stephen's teeth were gritted together, the fangs cutting into his gums without him noticing, the Connie arms tight around his middle to stop the fountain of red. "Because you did this! You messed everything up! I hate you!" His gem was unflinching, simply receiving the information as it came. Not a shred of shame, not a hint of rethinking his actions, not a single sorry. His answer wasn't immediate. Stephen was left scowling challengingly up at his other half as the color slowly drained from his face. His gem only stared back, as if a loading symbol was circling around in his head while he calculated what to say. His family outside the bubble were stunned, all of them stuck as mute as they watched the scene unfold. When his gem did answer, it wasn't what he wanted to hear. "Grievances acknowledged. I am attempting fusion. Please do not resist." He reached again, so Stephen pushed him away with a hissing protest of, "No!" The effort it took to simply do that was too much. He collapsed to the side, feeling his whole body clench into a tearing wail. He writhed on the wet sand, coughing up scarlet droplets as pain seared through his guts like fire and ice at the same time, the Connie arm still squeezing his jacket into his torn belly to try and retain what blood he hadn't lost yet. "You are critically damaged," his gem acknowledged, more to himself than Stephen. "Complications predicted. Alternative options. Healing spit may achieve more chances to fuse before death." His eyes focused back on Stephen's face as he stared up dazedly at him, licking his fingers thoroughly as he said blandly, "Administering healing spit. I apologize for any discomfort. Really do not resist this time." He didn't give Stephen a choice on this one. He rolled Stephen over onto his side, nudging the Connie arms out of the way gently, his grip not too tight but not loose enough to slip out of. His gem's hand stroked down towards Stephen's stomach, but it didn't hurt yet. It actually felt better, like his body knew that it belonged there. His eyes fluttered closed, his gem's warmth relaxing him into submission for a heartbeat long enough to let him do his work. So, before he could remember that he was supposed to hate him and stop him, his gem pressed what seemed like his whole hand into the gaping wound in his middle, causing Stephen to seize up in a caterwaul of agony. The pain was like a flashing series of blinding colors, overtaking his vision. Every single thought in his head blasted away, unable to comprehend anything. Heat coated all of it in a glaze of pink. He saw nothing but the burning colors for what felt like too long. But as his sight returned and his gem's hand was taken away, Stephen realized that he wasn't bleeding out anymore. He was still soaked with his own dark scarlet lifeblood. He was still dizzy and uncoordinated, but he looked down to see that the hole had healed. Actually, not all the way. There was still a dip in his skin, a crater left where the gem had once been. The flesh along the inside of the hole was twisted and pale, still washed with red. His whole scaly stomach was stretched with white scar tissue, very sensitive to the touch, but the mind-numbing pain was gone. For the first few seconds, he just stared at himself, shocked at the lack of, continued death. But after those seconds passed, he really began to feel the difference between the pain that came with the fatal injury and the pain that came with being separated from his gem. Before, it had just been a huge hurricane of awfulness, but now that the physical parts of it were taken away, he was able to really feel how much he needed his gem's life force. It was like he hadn't slept in his whole life. The exhaustion was so deep, so rooted, so draining that he almost instantly lost any motivation to do anything. He was scared enough to get up and bolt away, but his body was tied to lead chain balls, dragging him down, begging for him to just let the gem take him so they'd feel alive again. Life extended by 18 minutes, his gem was reporting, the words almost sliding past his ears. Your life will be lost shortly if I do not return to you. I require your compliance to continue. Stephen, how may I persuade you to fuse? You can't, Stephen began, his words slightly slurred as he fought off sleep that he knew he'd never wake up from. I won't go back to you. I don't need you. I could survive with Connie just fine. His gem looked him up and down, the skepticism obvious despite his lack of expression. Incorrect, he lectured him. Her human components are not fulfilling to your needs. I am compatible. You will fuse with me, or die. Stephen stared at him, foggily trying to understand what he said. No, this would work. He was sure. He couldn't go back. Stephen shook his head stubbornly to push away the chilling doubts, hissing, Well, then I guess I'll die! I cannot allow you to do that. His gem tensed, ready to jump to his aid, no matter how much he denied it. I do not believe I am making this clear. We are the same person. We have been, unfortunately, split in half. I am your gem. You are my body. We are apart. We need to fuse to be whole again. If you are not whole, you will die. Do you understand, Stephen? I heard you the first time. I'm not an idiot, he shot back, bristling with frustration. He knew his gem thought that he was being irrational and stupid. He could feel it, and it made him want to punch the pink reflection in his dumb, expressionless face. Maybe he'd finally get him to react if he did that. Maybe he'd finally show some sort of sign that he cared at all about what he did. Stop trying to save me, Stephen snarled. I know you'll be fine on your own. Just go off and do gem stuff. I'm perfectly happy without you. The patience of his gem was surprising but irritating. His pink twin continued, unwavering. You will not be perfectly happy. You will be dead. I cannot allow that. I am programmed to preserve you. Therefore, I know what is best for you. Still, Stephen refused, snapping, No, you don't! You never did! Do you think killing everyone is what's best for me? Yes, he replied at once, as if it was the easiest question in the world. Everyone is dangerous. Don't you remember? Do not worry. I will protect you. I don't want that, Stephen began, the tiredness dragging a sob out of his throat. He heard his father's voice from outside the pink dome, desperate and begging. Stephen, please, just do what he says! Garnet yelled at him. You can't replace your gem with Connie. She can't make you whole all by herself. Stephen shook his head over and over again, pushing his other half away from him, even as he reached to scoop him up into safety. He resisted the comforting glow of pink, doing everything that he could to stop his gem from returning, repeating, No, stop! And trying to drag himself away from him. He couldn't go back. He wouldn't. Finally, his gem halted his attempts, drawing back slightly with his hands at his side, as if he had decided that this was pointless. His gem sat crisscrossed, just staring at him with those hollow, calculating eyes. He said, Your emotions are causing conflict. Resolution may result in fusion. I am willing to converse if it will reach a compromise. Please state grievances in detail. The crazed fury churned inside of him. His gem still didn't get it. He still wasn't able to piece it together. How did he not know why Stephen wanted to get rid of him? Well, if he wanted to talk to him, then Stephen was going to make him get it. So he scowled up at him scathingly, gathering himself before beginning with a spilling of words that he'd been building up for too long now. You hurt everyone, even if they don't do anything, because you're just so paranoid. You think everyone's gonna hurt us, so instead you hurt them. Why do you think that's okay? You're scared of everything. You never listen to me. You never listen to me. Why are you always so afraid? He finished, feeling like steam must be pouring out of his ears, his breaths heaving in and out with great effort as he found it harder and harder to keep moving his lungs. His gem's expression didn't change as he thought to himself, loading his response carefully. When his gem answered, his voice remained even and calm, saying, almost matter-of-factly, "I have been listening to you." Stephen yelled out with, "How do you think—" "Let me speak, please." His gem blinked at him composedly, and continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. "I have been listening to you. When you are scared, I protect you. When there is a fight, I attack for you. When you want them to leave you alone, I shield you from them and let you run. The world is dangerous. It always has been. I keep you out of danger. I am not afraid. You are." Stephen was taken aback. He was painfully accurate in a way that he refused to accept. No, I'm not," he stammered, his gem waiting patiently for a response. Don't use me as an excuse." His gem tilted his head contemplatively, as if this was just an interesting chat with an old friend. He eventually responded with, "You appear to be using me as an excuse." "What? Excuse?" Stephen burst out. "No! Nothing we did was excusable. You need to stop overreacting. You can't do those things, not even for me. Just stop hurting everyone." "I would not have to if you were not in danger. You always feel like you are in danger," his gem replied easily. "I will not leave you to die, and if that requires others to hurt, I will make that decision for you." "No, don't make that decision," Stephen barked with a fierce order. "It's my decision, not yours. It's never been yours. I just want to be better than Mom. I just want to make good decisions for once. I can't let you mess it up anymore." Stephen broke down into an exasperated whimper. "I'm not in danger anymore. Everything's better now. We can live peacefully. Why am I always so afraid?" Stephen trembled, a fatigued sigh grating out of him. Why do we do this to ourselves?" he asked, weary and empty. "I do not know," his gem mumbled quietly. He watched Stephen's tears roll down his face, blank as ever. His gem slowly patted the top of Stephen's curly-haired head as he lied there, weak and quivering like a half-drowned mouse. He looked like he was trying to comfort him, but didn't know exactly how. Stephen could still feel the vague connection to his other half. The view of his vision was blurry and distant, but it was still there. Stephen would never be able to get away from his gem. Through that connection, he could feel the dulled emotions that were sparking across his gem's robotic mind. It was simpler emotions, all wired to one main point, to make Stephen survive. Because he loved Stephen more than anything else in the world, like a mother loves their child. He would do anything for Stephen. But what came with that love was fear, distrust, anxiety, paranoia. His gem loved Stephen, but it was scared of the world taking him away. So he did everything in his power to protect him, even if the things that he perceived as deadly threats were nothing at all. His gem could fight off White Diamond, he could strike out, turn his skin pink, weaponize his screams, but he couldn't figure out how to help Stephen in the way that he needed it. He couldn't figure out how to solve Stephen's problems in any way that wasn't violence. That was the problem. His gem could fight anything for him, but it couldn't fix his mind. This fear needed to stop. You're broken," Stephen began, his words wobbling like a newborn deer at first. But it's not your fault. You're broken because I'm broken." He stayed collapsed on his side, letting his gem run his fingers through his curls of dark hair, the warmth beckoning for him to give in as exhaustion bit at him at the other side. Stephen couldn't do anything more about this. His gem would always be afraid of losing him, and Stephen would always have to stop it from hurting everyone. Him removing his gem didn't solve the problem. Sure, he could see what the problem was now, but that didn't mean that they'd reached a conclusion. He was still afraid. He couldn't get better like this, no matter how much he had hoped to. I'm sorry for blaming you," Stephen sighed. "This all started because of our mom. She's the one to blame. But now we're just like her." He lowered to a pathetic whisper. I don't want to be like her. I'm supposed to be better." His gem's hand lifted from his hair in surprise. A dose of confusion moved his brow before it returned to a blank stare. "You dislike our mother," he stated. "Why?" "What? She left us!" Stephen jumped up, shocked at his puzzled look. "She left everyone! We spent our whole childhood cleaning up her mess. That's what made us this way. She broke Volleyball's eyes. She left Spinel to rot in a garden. She started a war under a secret identity instead of staining her own. She bubbled bismuth away. She let the other diamonds believe that she was dead. She lied to everyone. She was a coward!" Stephen could see the hurt looks from the people outside. His dad, the diamonds, garnet, amethyst, pearl, spinel, volleyball, bismuth, lapis, peridot. But he did not care. The rush of resentment and anger was too strong. "She loved us," his gem said. "No, she didn't," Stephen replied darkly. "She didn't. If she did, she wouldn't have broken the whole world apart and left us to pick up the pieces. We were just a kid. Why did she do that to us? To everyone? Why didn't she love us enough to spare us from her own mistakes?" He only realized now that he had fresh tears drenching his face, dropping onto the wet sand below his bloody talons. He was shaking, not just from fatigue, feeling lower than a worm. I know you're not my mom," he stammered timidly, "but I kind of wish you were. I wish you'd reformed into her just so I could talk to her." He turned his head up to look at the pink reflection. I wish I could ask her why." His gaze lowered again, shame crawling up his neck. "I don't want to hate her anymore. If I just knew what she'd say, then maybe I wouldn't hate her as much." There was another wide expanse of quiet that filled the air, only broken by Stephen's sniffling coughs. He could feel his strength leaving him, bit by bit, the urge to fall asleep growing more and more powerful as if gravity was pressing down on him, increasing slowly and steadily. His gem was thinking again, calculating his best response, working through the tangles of what had happened to Stephen and how to get it to be better again. Stephen could easily follow his gem's train of thought. Maybe they couldn't fix their overprotective relationship right now, but if he could fix this quarrel with his mom, maybe Stephen would fuse. His pink reflection seemed to land on an idea before long. He grabbed onto his shoulders and gently sat him up, supporting him there as Stephen's mutated limbs hung heavily below him, his neck sore from the effort of keeping his head up. But he didn't try to force fusion again. Instead, he told him, "You need closure. I am not your mother anymore. I will never be your mother ever again. She is gone. But I knew her as well as you know yourself, and I know what she would want to tell you if she heard what had happened to you." Hope lighted through him in a jumping flame. Of course, nobody would know Pink Diamond better than his gem. It was Pink Diamond before it was Stephen's gem. The answer could be right in front of him. He could finally know, finally hear from a source that wasn't her adoring comrades, her family, or an old scripted tape, from someone who had been her in a different life. But apprehension dampened the fireplace glow before it got too bright. What if his mom was mad at him? What if she was disgusted at how far he'd fallen? What if she blamed him for all of this? Or, even worse, what if she didn't even care? He couldn't take a second longer. Stephen asked urgently, What would she say?" This time, the answer didn't need calculation. It came immediately after the question was done leaving his mouth. "She would say sorry." Stephen felt his chest tighten enough to make him nearly fall, and he didn't know if it was from the lack of his gem or not. "She would say sorry, over and over again," his gem nodded. "She would cry as she tries to explain about how guilty she feels, how she had no idea, how she never wanted this to happen." Stephen interrupted, still so stunned that his tongue felt numb. "But how did she not want it to happen if she did all that herself?" His gem's response came easily once more. She would promise that she was a better gem than she was before. She would explain about how she had no way of going back on what she already did whenever she realized how messed up the world had become because of her. Pink Diamond had made mistakes, and she had tried to change into Rose Quartz to fix them. And she did the best that she could as Rose Quartz. "She couldn't go back?" Stephen repeated emptily. His gem shook his head. It was too late. When she began to realize how much her actions were affecting others, she had already done too many permanent things that she couldn't go back on without risking the lives of the people that she had left. He began to list off her mistakes, one by one. If she let bismuth out, it would cause a rift in the rebellion between shatterers and non-shatterers, and she couldn't risk that during war. Everyone needed to be together against shattering rather than arguing for it. After the war, bismuth would have blamed her for the corruption of her comrades and claimed that the shattering ways were right all along, and our mother would need to bubble her away again. So why let her suffer with the knowledge of what had happened to them? Retrieving Spinel would mean opening up the homeworld warp, which would let the Diamonds know that there were still rebels left on Earth, restarting the war with a whole planet of gems against 5. Pink Pearl was far out of reach. If she returned as Pink Diamond and explained her Rose Quartz situation, the Diamonds would never let her see the light of day again and shatter her friends. They'd strip everything away from her, and she would be powerless to stop them. He felt his heart grow lighter as well as heavier. His gem was right, now that he was thinking about it. His mom couldn't fix everything, not without putting everyone else in mortal danger again. Stephen's unfocused gaze lowered to the scarred gap in his stomach left by his gem. But what about me? Did she know? He breathed, almost unable to finish the thought. His gem lowered his head with what might have been a sigh. He said, "She thought the world had come to the most peaceful point it could get to. She thought her new life was really free and away from the Diamonds. She never meant for you to get caught up in it. What she said in the tape was the full truth. She wanted you to live a real human life without Homeworld getting in the way. She thought that she was making a new life go out to live on its own. She never intended to cause us so much pain." His gem held his chin up so he could see him properly. He never looked more certain as he told Stephen quietly, "She loved us." Stephen felt a shivering laugh rise in his throat. His shoulders shook from the tired chuckle, his eyes contrasting the noise with even more tears that traced down his face, wetting the sand and dirt smudged there. His head lowered as he crumbled down onto the beach, his gem letting him go. He didn't even know what he was feeling right now, but he knew that it was a good thing. He was reassured, he was grateful, he was sorry, but most of all, he felt the hate leave him. Forgiveness, that was the right word. His mother wasn't cruel. She just made a lot of bad decisions and didn't know how to fix them all in time. Not unlike Stephen. "Thank you," he murmured, closing his eyes. They didn't need to say anything more. Not a single other word was exchanged as his gem gently reached his arms around him and scooped his bigger twin up into a hug with utmost care. The warmth as they embraced each other was full of trust, his worn-down body finally giving in to the safety that his gem was providing. A sheet of pink light covered them both as they began to melt back together, intertwining into one being. He could feel their consciousness lining up again, like the focusing of a lens, the two images sliding over each other as his body mixed evenly. The comfort of his gem was returning. His gem was relieved to have Stephen back with him. He was becoming whole again. When the light filtered off of them like falling leaves in the autumn, Stephen was left kneeling there, his gem back in its place, nestled into where his belly button would have been. He was happy, tired and happy. "I love you too, Mom," Stephen whispered through a crackled voice, peace smoothing over his mind in a soft wave. But, just as he had made amends with something that he thought he'd never be able to set to rest, Stephen felt it began to ebb and flow away from him like a retreating tide. He could still see Connie's mangled body stuck with his. Beach City was still destroyed, and the fear from both him and his gem was still stabbing into them like a deadly snakebite. This wasn't over. But it had certainly been pushed in the right direction, fixing the one biggest, most destructive problem that he had been carrying for his whole life. Pink Diamond. Now he was on to the rest of the problem. Everything else.